Welcome everybody to our very first video of the course. So just a reminder, these lecture videos are not a replacement for your Odigia textbook. So you still need to order the Odigia textbook and be reading through it. This is just kind of a visual representation since some of us are more visual learners and prefer a lecture format. But you still need to have the Odigia textbook and be taking the practice questions for the Odigia textbook so that you get the credit for that. So we're going to start off the course with this first topic. So topic 1, tools of the trade. And this particular topic, we have it divided, in the textbook it's divided into 3 sections. So this video covers the first section, the process of science. So we're going to start off this video looking at basically the process of science. But before we get into it, let's just introduce this course. So this course, we're studying biology. So if you take that word biology, divide it up, bio, what does bio mean? It means life, and ology means the study of. So of course we're studying the living things. So we're studying living organisms and basically how they interact with one another and their environment. So as we're moving our way through the course, we're going to be learning about living things. So we're going to be learning from the smallest component of life, which would be the cell. Specifically. So Bio 101, we're looking at cellular biology. And then if you progress through the series, 102 deals more with animal biology, and then 103 deals more with plant biology. So you can continue through the series if you'd like. So in this particular first topic this week, we're going to cover in the textbook, what is the process of science? And then this next video after this will cover the second topic, which is measurement and the metric system. And then microscopy is the third topic in the textbook for this topic 1. So let's start with what is the process of science. So the learning objectives for what is the process of science. So by the end of the video, you should be able to answer these. And just a tip, you might want to write these down, and then by the end of the video, answer them. See, how much you remember from the video. It's a good study tip to make sure you're understanding summarizing what you learned from the video, as well as what you're learning from the textbook. So the first objective, by the end of the video, you should be able to identify the shared characteristic of the natural sciences. You should also understand the process of scientific inquiry. You should be able to compare inductive reasoning with deductive reasoning, and you should be able to describe the goals of basic science and applied science. Okay? So the field of biology, we're going to basically delve into it, starting with the oldest signs of life on Earth. So if you take a look at this figure on the right, you can see these microscopic organisms. So we think that life began with these microscopic organisms. Something similar to what you see over here on the left, these bacterial cells. We think something like that were the oldest forms of life, a few billion years ago. So in this case, these are photosynthetic bacteria called cyanobacteria. Okay, so these we think are similar to the oldest microorganisms of life. Okay. So what is science? Well, science is knowledge. Okay, so basically, it's a way that we can figure out the general truths or the operation of general laws. And we do this through a process, and that process is called the scientific method. So this process is basically it's it's a form of testing. Okay, so it's a process. It's a testing form of acquiring the knowledge. We don't just guess, right? We're not just thinking about something and decide this is truth. So it's a process involved, and we're acquiring evidence to support it in the form of empirical data. So that scientific method is a method of research with defined steps that include experiments as well as careful observation. So we are requiring this evidence to support our idea here. Okay, so you can see, for example, figuring out how our body gets its energy. So how did we figure that out? We think about how we acquire our energy. We take in food, and then our body breaks it down through our digestive tract. So you can see how in our digestive tract, we can't necessarily break it down all ourselves, but inside the gut of our digestive tract, in our intestines, we have little tiny bacteria, E. coli. You might think, hey, E. coli, that isn't that bad. Well, we have a symbiotic relationship with E. coli in our intestines. They actually help further break down our food waste, and break it down further so that we can actually absorb important nutrients such as vitamin K. Okay, so this is actually something that is useful for us. We have a symbiotic relationship with bacteria. So that's something that was acquired over time. Pretty cool. So let's talk about the scientific method. Okay, so a couple of key terms that we need to understand with the scientific method before we learn the process. So first off, hypothesis. Now, most of you already know what a hypothesis is. So the first thing that comes to mind when I think of hypothesis is an educated guess. So it's basically, thinking about the answer to a question, but it's an educated answer. But the technical response is it's a suggested explanation for an event which we can test. So when we come up with a hypothesis, our hypothesis has to be testable. Okay, so we can't just come up with a hypothesis that cannot be testable. Okay, so otherwise, what's the point? And it also has to be falsifiable. All right, so this kind of eliminates some of those things out there. So we can't answer some of life's questions. So some of science can't answer everything. It can't answer what is love, or which president should I vote for, or what which I don't know, is there a God, or things like that. That's not something that science can answer, because it can't be tested and it can't be falsifiable. Okay, so hypotheses, it has to be tested, it has to be falsifiable. So that's what a hypothesis is. So it's a suggested explanation for an event which we can test. A scientific theory it's kind of like a hypothesis, but it's been tested over and over and over again, and it's been confirmed with lots of evidence to support it. So it's a confirmed explanation for observations or phenomena. So when you think of a scientific theory, it's a broad based, set of, explanations. So it's something like, you think about, if you can think of a scientific theory, that would be like the theory of gravity. Okay, so it's not something like, I have a theory that it's going to rain today. Okay, that's not a theory, that's a hypothesis. Okay, so a theory is broad in scope. So a scientific theory would be like the theory of gravity, or germ theory, or the theory of natural selection or theory of evolution by means of natural selection. Or we'll talk about cell theory in the third video of this topic. So scientific theories are broad in scope, and they've been tested over and over and over again and have varied evidence to support it. Okay? So that's what a scientific theory is. So it's a hypothesis that has been tested over and over again with lots of evidence to support it. And then finally we have scientific law. So a scientific law is like a scientific theory, but it's more in kind of the realm of math and physics. So it's basically the same thing as a theory, but instead of for biology, and we use it for math and physics, and sometimes chemistry. So scientific law is a description, often in the form of a mathematical formula, for the behavior of some aspect of nature under certain specific conditions. So as far as this class, we will learn about a law, scientific law, when it comes to energy. So I think we learn about the law of thermodynamics. So that is kind of a physics law, how energy, the first law of thermodynamics states that energy is not created nor destroyed. It's only converted from one form to another. So that basically states that, we've never seen energy it's never been created. We cannot create energy. We have never been able to create energy. We have never been able to destroy energy. We can just convert it from one form to another. So power plants, they don't create energy. They just take it from one form and convert it to another. Okay. So for example, a coal plant, it's not creating energy. It's burning coal and converting it into electricity. So it's not creating the energy. Okay. So energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It is just converted from one form to another. So that is the first law of thermodynamics. So that is a scientific law. So scientific laws are like scientific theories. It's just a different term. Okay, so these are, just parts of the scientific method. So they're kind of like just some words that we have to learn, some definitions we have to learn when we're talking about science. All right, so let's get into our area of science, the natural sciences. So natural sciences, of course, they're the fun sciences. Well, that's just my opinion. So they're dealing with the things like biology. You can also think of geology as kind of a natural science. Anything that's dealing with the physical world and its phenomena are considered natural sciences. Okay, so things, like astronomy, biology, geology, chemistry, all of those things are kind of considered natural sciences. Things that are not considered natural sciences would be like computer science. Okay, so computer science, that's man-made, right? So, we created computers, so that's not considered a natural science, all right? So we will be dealing with natural science because that's a life science. That's biology is considered natural. All right, so let's move into scientific inquiry. So, of course, the ultimate reason for science is to know something. We're curious about things. We want to understand the world that is around us. So we seek to understand the world and the way it operates. So we have, two methods of logical reasoning or thinking. So we have something called inductive reasoning, and the other way is deductive reasoning. So let's take a look at inductive reasoning. So inductive reasoning uses related observations to arrive at a general conclusion. So for example, let's say that I take a look around and I notice that In this environment, I see a bunch of squirrels in my backyard, and they're not all the same. Okay, they each one looks a little different, but they're all the same species. But they're competing for the same resources. They're all kind of chasing each other and fighting over access to, well, the bird feeder and the other things that are around in my yard. So they're competing for the same resources. So that's some observations. So they're not all the same, but they're the same species. They're competing for the same resources, and but they're obviously living in the same area, so they're adapted to this environment. So I can come up with the conclusion that the ones that are most adapted to my backyard are going to survive and outcompete the other ones, okay? And they're gonna, survive and mate and be able to pass on their traits to the next generation. So that's a form of inductive reasoning. I'm observing these squirrels, and I'm saying that the ones that are most fit for this environment are going to be the ones that end up reproducing and making babies and passing those traits on to the next generation. The ones that are kind of the losers, the ones that can't get enough resources, they're going to die before they reproduce. So that's a form of inductive reasoning. So I'm relating observations to arrive at a general conclusion. So this is common in descriptive or discovery science. So I'm making observations and I'm recording them. Okay. The other type of reasoning is called deductive reasoning. So this uses a general principle or law to predict specific results. Okay. So in this case, let's say I take the conclusion I drew from the last my inductive reasoning. So the squirrels that are best adapted to my backyard will survive and mate and be able to pass on their traits to the next generation. So from that general premise, I'm going to predict that over time, if the environment changes, the individuals that are better adapted to the changing environment will survive better. Okay, so I'm basically predicting the results for the future. Okay, so deductive reasoning basically uses some sort of general principle or law to predict specific results for the future. So it's used in hypothesis-based science. So we can deduce from current results and predict specific results that would be valid if the general principles are valid. So if based on our current situation, if we have, survival of the fittest taking place in my backyard, where the, best adapted squirrels are surviving and reproducing, then if there's a change in the environment, I assume that the ones that are adapted best to the change will survive and reproduce, and the ones not adapted to that change will die off. Okay, so that's a form of deductive reasoning. Okay. So inductive, we're basing it based on observations, arriving at a conclusion. Deductive, we're using some general, idea, principle that we've already concluded to predict future results or specific results. Okay. So based on that understanding, let's see if we remember which one's which. So the type of logical thinking that uses related observations to arrive at a general conclusion is called, what was that, deductive reasoning, the scientific method, hypothesis-based science, or inductive reasoning? So which one was it when we have related observations arriving to a general conclusion? If you chose inductive reasoning, I would agree with you. So remember, inductive reasoning, we're using related observations to come up with some sort of conclusion. deductive reasoning, we're coming up with something that we already know, we've already concluded to predict future results. All right, so now let's get into the scientific method. So the scientific method, it's pretty intuitive. It's something that you actually do every day, but you don't just sit there and stop and think, okay, I'm going to make a question, then I'm going to come up with a hypothesis. But we actually do this internally every day. So, oops, why is this thing up there? Go away. So the scientific method, we have a series of well-defined steps, and if we start out with an observation and a question and a hypothesis and so forth, and then if our hypothesis is not supported by our data, our evidence, then we need to propose a new hypothesis. Okay, so first off, the first step is we make an observation. Okay, so just like in the real world, you might make an observation. So let's say you come home and it's dark out, and so you come home and you turn on the light with the light switch, and hey, the light does not turn on. Okay, so that's an observation. Okay, it's still dark in your room even though you flip the switch and nothing's happening. So that's the observation. Okay, the switch is turned on in the on position, but it's still dark in your room. That's an observation. So then you ask a question. Why is the light not coming on? Okay, so that's the question. So then you form a hypothesis. Okay, so form a hypothesis. The hypothesis, remember we talked about this earlier, so a hypothesis has to be testable and it has to be falsifiable. So you need to be able to test it, and you need to be able to prove it. Either it needs to be able to be proven with evidence, or needs to be falsifiable, disproven. So you can't have well, it can kind of be proven, but it kind of not. So it has to be verified or not. So in this case, if my light switch is not coming off and on, I could have a hypothesis that states that the light bulb burned out. Okay, so that's a solid hypothesis. It is testable because I can remove the light bulb and replace it, right, with a new light bulb. And if that new light bulb works, then I know that the light bulb had burned out. It was a bad light bulb. The light bulb no longer works. So it's falsifiable. And if it, if it wasn't the light bulb, then if I put in a new light bulb and it still doesn't work, then it's falsifiable, right? Okay, so it goes both ways. So this hypothesis that the light bulb is burned out is not only testable, but it's falsifiable. So your hypothesis has to be testable, meaning we can actually, perform an experiment, and it's falsifiable, meaning that if I perform an experiment and the light bulb still doesn't work, then, it could be something else. All right, so that's our hypothesis. So we form a hypothesis to answer the question. The light bulb burned out. So next we make a prediction based on the hypothesis. So usually predictions are in the if-then format. If I replace the light bulb with a new light bulb, then the light switch will turn on. Okay, so if I replace the light bulb with a new light bulb, then the light will come on. Pretty simple. Okay, so then I'll do the experiment to test the prediction. So when you conduct an experiment, usually you have, what are called variables. So a variable is any part of the experiment that can vary or change during the experiment. So when we do this, this is a pretty simple experiment. So my independent variable in this case would be the light bulb. Okay, so it's basically I changed a light bulb. Okay, so I am, just replacing the light bulb with a new light bulb, and then my dependent variable would be whether it goes on or not. Okay. So those are things that can, change or vary in the experiment. But, generally in a more complicated or like a more lab experiment that you would be performing in this course, you might have different treatment groups. Okay, so in different treatment groups, you'd have like an experimental group that you're giving a treatment to or manipulation to, and then you'd have a control group which you leave where you don't give the treatment to. So for example, if we're testing, I don't know, which fertilizer works the best on plants, then we might have, 3 different treatments. So we'd have like 4 plants, and then 3 of the plants get, 3 different types of fertilizer. So plant number 1 gets Miracle-Gro, plant number 2 gets, this type of fertilizer, plant number 3 gets a different type of fertilizer, and then plant number 4 would get no fertilizer. So that would be the control group. It gets no fertilizer. So it's the control group because it's the comparison group. It's the one that we want to see if fertilizer even has an effect. So it's the comparison group. So if, plants 1, 2, and 3 grow a lot and plant 4 doesn't grow at all, then we know that yes, fertilizer does have an effect. But if plant 4 also grows a lot, then we know that fertilizer doesn't really make a difference. Okay, so that's what that control group is for. It's used for a comparison, and it's the one that doesn't get a treatment. In my example with the light bulb, there is no control group. Okay, so not all experiments have control groups. Okay, so each one will have 1 or more variables and 1 or more controls. So in my case, we don't really have, the control is whether or not the light bulb is put in. All right, so now that we have, we've made our prediction, if I change the light bulb, put in a new one, then and turn on the light will work. So then I do the experiment. So I replace the light bulb with a new light bulb, and let's say that it turns on. So if it turns on, then the hypothesis is supported and I report my results. If it doesn't turn on, that means the hypothesis is not supported. So then I have to try again. That means that I have to come up with a new hypothesis. Maybe it's something else. Maybe I tripped a circuit in I have to go to the electrical panel and see if I tripped a circuit. I don't know. So, something else is wrong. So that's kind of the gist of the scientific method. It's this series of steps that you take. All right. So here's a review question. A suggested and testable explanation for an event is called is it a hypothesis, a variable, a theory, or a control? If you chose a hypothesis, I would agree with you. Okay, it's not quite a theory yet because it's just a simple event. Okay, a hypothesis is a suggested and testable explanation for an event. Theories, they're more broad and have been tested over and over and over again. All right, so here is a visual connection question. So here we have a scenario, and we're going to try to figure out which is the hypothesis, which is the prediction. Okay, so we have it, it's not necessarily, is it in order? I can't tell. Okay, so it says which is the hypothesis, which is the prediction, which is based on the results here. So it says number 1, my toaster doesn't toast my bread. Number 2, why doesn't my toaster work? Number 3, there is something wrong with the electrical outlet. Number 4, if something is wrong within the outlet, my coffee maker also won't work when plugged into it. Number 5, I plug my coffee maker into the outlet. Number 6, my coffee maker works. So it sounds like it's in order. So which is the hypothesis? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6? If you chose 3, I would agree with you. Okay, there is something wrong with the electrical outlet. Okay, so this is testable. Okay, because we could, test it by putting something else in the outlet and seeing if, it's still doesn't work. Okay, and it's falsifiable because if we put something in there and it works, then we know that, it wasn't the outlet. So which one of these is the prediction? Well, we know it's not 3, so is it 1, 2, 4, 5, or 6? So if you chose number 4, I would agree with you. So remember, predictions are in the if-then format. So if something is wrong within the outlet, my coffee maker also won't work when plugged in. So number 4 is the prediction. And then this last question, based on the results, is the hypothesis supported? So the hypothesis is there is something wrong with the electrical outlet. It says, I plug my coffee maker into the outlet, my coffee maker works. So the hypothesis was not supported. Okay, so in this case, the hypothesis was not supported, so that means that they have to try again. Okay, so it wasn't the electrical outlet, it must have been the toaster. Okay, it was the toaster's fault, it wasn't the outlet's fault. So this gives you an idea of how the scientific method works in practice. Okay. So now let's take a look at basic science versus applied science. So when we're talking about basic science is pure science. So pure science seeks to expand on knowledge regardless of the short-term application of that knowledge. So think about, like for example, when I was studying science, for my master's degree, I sought to study hummingbird song. So there wasn't really an ultimate goal, like, the world needed to understand hummingbird song because, we had to solve this problem for humanity's sake. Okay, so this was more just pure science. We really needed to, this was something that, my lab that I was working in wanted to understand it better, and that was the only real reason to do that. Okay, so that's basic science. So it's just, expand our knowledge on something. Applied science aims to use science to solve some sort of immediate problem. So for example, think about looking for a cure to a particular disease. So, we had COVID-19 hit in 2020. So there was a race to find a vaccine for that. So that was applied science. So aim to use science to solve that immediate problem, get a vaccine out there, vaccinate as many people as possible to stop the spread of this virus. Okay, so that's applied science. So these two sciences can work together to solve practical problems. So for example, in order to create a vaccine so quickly to stop the spread of COVID-19, we needed to know, first of all, what are the, what is a virus? Okay, what is, an RNA type virus? We have to understand the coronavirus to begin with. We have to understand the difference between a DNA virus versus an RNA virus. We need to use basic science, understanding the types of diseases out there and so forth, before we can rush to save humanity with this type of specific vaccine. So basic science gives us kind of the foundation, and then applied science we can use to quickly develop something to save humanity. Okay, if that makes sense. So basic science, gives us more foundational support. Applied science, we build off of that for immediate needs. Okay. All right. So finally, we get to the process of science peer review. Now, let me go back. We've talked about our scientific method, how we get down to the bottom. We've analyzed our results. We've supported our hypothesis or not supported it. And then we get here to reporting our results. Now, if this is something that is going to be published, the way that it gets published is for publication. It's through a peer-reviewed process. So if it's going to be published in a scientific journal or an academic journal, it has to go through this extensive process of peer review. So if you look at any scientific journal, that journal article has been extensively reviewed through a blind process where scientists have read the article and of the field that it's been published in, and have read through it and scanned it and verified the results and determined that the article is valid. Okay, so this process takes a while. Usually when somebody finishes and applied for peer review, it could be a year or two later before it is actually published. So peer review is a very extensive process. So it involves a blind process where scientists of that field or submit the details of their experiments, results, and interpretation, and the reviewers are scientists that determine the veracity and merit of that work for publication. So it's not just like a newspaper where the journalists are submitting their work to an editor who's just kind of making edits. Okay, it's different. You have scientists in your own field who are looking and scrutinizing every tiny little detail of your work. And if something is amiss, it gets sent back to you, and then you have to verify that your little detail is correct, and then it gets sent back, and then it's back and forth, ping pong, over and over again, until finally it can be published. So a lot of times, these scientists, they have their work denied, okay? Or later on, even if it gets published, another scientist can come along and disprove their work, okay? So it can be taken aback. So the scientific process it's pretty extensive in its peer review, okay, and it can be it can end up being scrutinized later on. So when we look at a scientific journal article, it has a typical format. So it starts out with an abstract. So that's usually just like a summary. So you can kind of just read the abstract and understand what the article contains. And then there's an introduction, which is like a background of what the reader needs to know. And then a method, so that's what the experiment, how it was set up and run. And then a results section, so the data in a visual format as well as a text. And then a discussion section that discusses the results. And then the literature cited section. So you will be writing a few lab reports in this class, so this will be the same type of format you will be using for your lab report. So you'll have an abstract, introduction, methods, results, and discussion section, as well as a conclusion and a literature cited section. So that's it for our Tools of the Trade Part 1. So by now you should be able to identify the shared characteristics of the natural sciences, understand the process of scientific inquiry, compare inductive reasoning with deductive reasoning, and describe the goals of basic science and applied science. So we're done with what is the process of science. So the next video will cover part 2, which is measurement and the metric system.